He was about to marry the woman who had stood by his side for years, but at the altar he said no, all because of another woman. What he didn't know was that this woman was actually his childhood best friend, the same one he had humiliated years ago, now back, rich and trans. This isn't just a love story, it's about secrets, forgiveness, and the courage to start over. 3. Against the world summer in Charleston, South Carolina was always muggy, but that afternoon the heat felt heavier, like the air itself was thick with things left unsaid. Liam, Noah, and Emily were sitting on the porch of Noah's parents' house, sharing a cheap beer and laughing about high school days. They were in their early 20s, but whenever they were together, their teenage smiles came right back. They'd been inseparable since they were 12. Liam and Noah were always the closest, and Emily was the bridge between them, calm, observant, grounding their energy. That night, something changed. Liam, a few beers in, started to open up. He talked about how out of place he felt, how misunderstood he'd always been. Then, with a shaky voice, he confessed that he had been in love with Noah since he was 15. Emily went quiet, eyes fixed on the wooden floor of the porch. Noah stared straight ahead, stunned, unsure what to say. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. No one knew what to do. Liam, ashamed of saying too much, stood up and left without a word. 2 days later, it felt like the entire school knew about his confession. The whispers, the stares, the shame burning on Liam's face. It had slipped out during a conversation Emily had with a friend. She swore she didn't mean for it to get out, but the damage was done. Noah, confused and feeling the pressure from his friends and his own internal storm, lashed out. He said cruel things, tried to distance himself. Liam, humiliated and heartbroken, packed up and left town without looking back. He left Emily a single note. "Don't look for me. I need to disappear." Emily tried to reach out. She texted, called numbers that never answered. Noah, on the other hand, buried it all, pretending none of it had ever happened. Over time, he and Emily grew close in a different way, trying to fill the silence and the emptiness with shared comfort. Through quiet dinners and long, nostalgic walks, something new began to grow, a relationship built on the rubble of the past. Years went by, the town changed, but the memory of that night never fully faded. Emily carried a quiet guilt. And Noah? He never spoke of Liam again. It was like he had erased him from memory, but time doesn't erase everything. Some stories don't end, they just go quiet, waiting for the right moment to return. And that moment was just around the corner. The invitation. It had been 5 years since the night everything fell apart. Charleston moved along in its usual charming, quiet rhythm, with cobblestone streets and colourful facades that hid stories no one dared to speak out loud. Noah was now working as an architect, and Emily taught history at a public school. They had been engaged for 8 months. The wedding was 3 weeks away, a simple countryside ceremony, surrounded by family and old friends. Their lives seemed stable, Sunday lunches with their parents, talks of having kids, picking out flowers, planning the menu, building the wedding playlist. Emily threw herself into the planning as a way to keep from thinking too much. Outwardly, she smiled with ease. Inside, there was still a knot, something unresolved, buried in the past. But it resurfaced now and then in her dreams. Noah, on the other hand, stayed steady. He never mentioned Liam's name again. It was as if that chapter had never existed. Then, an unexpected invitation arrived. Emily was at school when she received an email with the subject line, RSVP, Charity Gala for LGBTQIA+ violence survivors. The sender's name, Elena Morgan. She had never heard of her before, but something about the name caught her. There was a strange familiarity to it, an unsettling sense of déjà vu. When she opened the body of the email, an image popped up, an elegant woman with deep brown eyes, dark hair, and a calm, serene smile. She was the event's host, a young, trans woman, wealthy, a tech entrepreneur, founder of Morgan Hearts, a nationally recognized non-profit organization. Emily read through the invitation carefully. The gala would be held in Charleston, the first of its kind in the region. A grand event with media coverage, artists, and political figures attending. For some reason, Emily felt compelled to go, more out of curiosity than empathy. That night, she showed the invitation to Noah. He hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, said it would be good to show support. Emily found his choice of words strange, but didn't press. On the night of the event, the city looked different, lit up with color and energy. Decorated facades, pride flags, a red carpet. Emily wore a deep navy blue dress, simple yet elegant. Noah, in a black suit, looked more tense than usual. They stepped into the main hall and were greeted by camera flashes and soft background music. Everything felt polished, upscale. But nothing stood out more than Elena Morgan herself, gliding down the grand staircase in a white dress, radiating confidence. Emily froze for a moment. There was something in the way this woman looked at people, like she could see straight through them, like she knew their secrets, like she knew them. The recognition. The gala continued on, filled with inspiring speeches, clinking glasses, elegant laughter, and perfectly rehearsed conversations. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could pull Noah and Emily's eyes away from Elena Morgan. There was something mesmerizing about her. Emily watched her gestures, the way she walked, her steady posture, like she had been born for that kind of room. Noah, on the other hand, couldn't explain why he felt so uneasy. There was a tightness in his chest, a strange heat crawling up his neck, like someone was watching him. Elena, meanwhile, kept smiling, shaking hands with dignitaries, posing for the press. But every so often, her eyes would drift briefly in their direction. She knew who they were. She had recognized Noah the moment she saw him. The face, the way he adjusted his collar, the restrained laugh. It was him. The same boy Liam had once fallen in love with. The same person who had hurt him, driven him to disappear. And there he was, holding hands with Emily, the friend who betrayed him. There was no anger in Elena's eyes. What lived there now was something deeper, more mature, more complex, a mix of nostalgia and control. She had changed, inside and out. She was no longer the boy who ran away in shame, but a confident woman shaped by pain and rebirth. Still, standing there in front of them twisted something in her gut. There was a part of her that wasn't fully at peace. After dinner, while Noah stepped away to chat with a co-worker, Elena made her way to Emily. The two exchanged brief, polite smiles. The conversation started light, compliments about the dress, the event, the city. Emily, unsure why, felt a strange discomfort, like every word was being weighed, like she was being tested somehow. Then Elena asked, her gaze cutting through, "Are you from Charleston? Have you always lived here?" Emily hesitated. Something about the question didn't feel casual. "Yeah, since I was a kid." "Why?" Elena smiled but didn't answer. She simply raised her glass and said, "To roots and to the ghosts we think we've forgotten." Emily stood frozen, glass in hand, her mind spinning. She didn't quite understand what that meant, but something deep inside her began to stir. Very soon, all the secrets would start to rise. The first lies, the sound of silverware being cleared, the soft murmur of the orchestra in the background, and the constant clinking of champagne glasses created a near-theatrical atmosphere in the grand ballroom of the gala. The night moved on, but Noah's mind felt stuck somewhere far away. Ever since his eyes met Elena Morgan's, something inside him had come undone. It wasn't just attraction, though that was there too. simmering beneath the surface. It was something deeper, something more unsettling. A strange sense of familiarity that made no logical sense, but sent his body into alert. Like this woman, so powerful, so poised, carried within her the echo of a story left unfinished. Meanwhile, Emily was trying to keep her composure. She still felt the weight of her brief conversation with Elena. That final line, "To the ghosts we think we've forgotten," kept echoing in her mind. It had seemed casual, even poetic, but it was loaded, intentional. Emily, who rarely gave in to paranoia, felt, maybe for the first time in a long while, that something was off. She glanced at Elena across the room and saw how she smiled at everyone, but always with the air of someone playing chess in silence, 2 or 3 moves ahead. Noah, after saying goodbye to a work contact, walked to the bar to grab another glass of wine. He was distracted and didn't even notice when Elena appeared beside him. She was the one who broke the silence, her tone light, almost rehearsed. "You look a little out of place. Do you hate social events or just wish you were anywhere else?" He smiled politely, slightly guarded. "Maybe both. My fiancé talked me into coming. These things aren't really my scene." "Ah." "The fiancé," Elena repeated the word, like she was trying it on for size. "You two seem like you've been together for a while." Noah nodded, still unsure but feeling oddly at ease. Elena had that kind of magnetic presence that slipped past defenses before you even noticed. She spoke with a mix of charm and depth he didn't encounter often, not even with Emily. Within minutes, they were talking about architecture, how the city had changed, and the feeling that adulthood is often a string of choices you only begin to understand years later. "Have you ever lived here?" Noah asked, trying to sound casual, though the question slipped out with a trace of urgency. Elena stared at her glass for a moment before replying, "I did. In another life, let's say." The answer lingered in the air like thick smoke. Noah didn't know how to respond, but his heart was racing. There was something about this woman, an enigma. She spoke in layers, truths wrapped in poetic riddles, and that pulled him in. Across the room, Emily watched them, her chest tightening with an anxiety she couldn't yet name. On the ride home, the silence in the car was heavy. Emily drove, her fingers tapping restlessly on the steering wheel. Noah scrolled through his phone, but his mind was still with Elena. He didn't mention anything to Emily, not the conversation, not even that they'd spoken. It was the first lie in years. A small one, maybe, but the kind that cracks the surface, the kind that, if repeated, can lead you somewhere far from where you started. That night, while Emily slept beside him, Noah tossed and turned. His mind kept circling back to Elena's face, her voice, the way she looked at him, like she saw right through him. There was something there, an attraction beyond the physical, a connection he couldn't name, but that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. What he didn't know was that this reunion wasn't a coincidence. Elena had come back with a purpose, not for revenge, but for something far more delicate and difficult, to see if it was still possible to love and be loved by someone who once rejected her, without ever knowing who she truly was. And this was only the beginning. Dinner for two. 2 days after the gala, Elena sent Noah a direct message. It was short, to the point, and mysteriously intimate. "Dinner tomorrow? I promise it won't be as formal as that night." Noah read the message several times before replying. There was a hesitation he didn't want to name, but he felt it deeply. He didn't tell Emily. He simply said he had a meeting with a potential client interested in a residential project. It was the second lie, more elaborate, more strategic. Elena had suggested a quiet restaurant, dimly lit, with candles on the tables and soft jazz playing in the background. The kind of place that asked for no rush, no explanations, only presence. When Noah arrived, Elena was already there. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned up in a casually elegant way, and her gaze held both mystery and clarity. She stood to greet him with a kiss on the cheek. A light touch, but electrifying. Noah felt the weight of that closeness. It was the kind of gesture you didn't offer just anyone. They sat. The wine arrived, and the conversation flowed like it had at the gala. Effortless, captivating, and dangerously sincere. They talked about the past, about the roads not taken, and about the strange feeling that sometimes life pushes us so far we lose touch with who we really are. Elena guided the conversation like a dance, allowing space but still leading the steps. Noah, increasingly at ease, found himself sharing pieces of his life with surprising openness. He talked about feeling stuck in a predictable routine, about the fear of not knowing whether what he felt was love or just habit. And Elena listened, not to judge, but like someone who knew that kind of emptiness from the inside. "Sometimes," she said, voice soft, almost like a confession, "we adapt so well to a version of ourselves that we forget who we were before. All of it." Noah looked at her, and for a brief moment, he felt a flicker of recognition, an echo of someone he might have once known. But the thought passed quickly, swept away by the intensity of the moment. He looked away and took a deep breath. Elena smiled subtly. Everything was going as she'd imagined, and yet part of her was beginning to fear the next step. Revealing herself meant risking everything again, but hiding was becoming unbearable. Outside, the Charleston night fell gently. The lights reflecting in the restaurant windows gave the evening a cinematic feel. Noah leaned slightly across the table, his eyes searching hers. For a split second, Elena thought he might say her old name, Liam, but he didn't. He just smiled, like someone catching a glimpse of themselves in a warped mirror. "Can I ask you something?" he said, almost in a whisper. "Of course." "Why do I feel like I know you from somewhere?" Elena's heart skipped. She smiled, but inside, she felt the impact. Maybe because we met in another life. The answer, ambiguous, made him laugh, but it was a nervous laugh, like someone sensing they're on the edge of something big. Dinner ended late. Noah didn't want to leave. Elena didn't want him to go either, but they didn't kiss. There was something sacred in that non-gesture, a space of respect and tension, of desire and restraint. That night, when Noah returned home, he entered in silence, slipped into bed beside Emily, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Emily, eyes closed, could feel the restlessness in his body. She didn't ask anything, but inside her, something was growing. The sense that something important was about to fall apart. Meanwhile, Elena stood on the balcony of her loft, looking out over the city. She knew she was crossing a line. But what drove her wasn't revenge or payback. It was the longing to be seen for who she was now, and maybe, finally, to be loved for it. The game of silences, lies, and truths was only just beginning. What remains? After the end, the days that followed the non-wedding were filled with whispers, headlines, judgment, and silence. The small community where it all happened, despite its outward modernity, still carried traces of hidden conservatism. The story spread quickly. Trans businesswoman interrupts traditional wedding by revealing herself as groom's former best friend. That was the headline circling social media, gossip sites, even local newspapers. But for the three people at the center, Elena, Noah, and Emily, the echoes of those hours didn't come in headlines. They came as an internal tremor, deep and personal, resonating differently in each of them. Emily disappeared for a few days. She went to her aunt's house in rural Virginia. She needed air, space, a solitude that didn't judge. She brought books, but didn't read. Brought a journal, but didn't write. She spent hours just staring out the window, remembering every detail of their three-way friendship. how Liam trusted her, how he shared secrets no one else had ever heard, and how she betrayed him. Maybe unintentionally, but still, she had. More than losing her fiancé, she felt like she'd lost herself. Or maybe she had finally found herself there, in the depth of a pain she had avoided for years. When she came back a week later, she looked for Elena. They met at the cafe the three of them used to frequent in high school. Emily arrived first. She looked thinner, her eyes sunken, but her gaze was steady. When Elena walked in, their eyes met, cautiously, but not with hostility. They sat. The initial silence was almost comfortable. There was no more need to pretend. "Are you happy?" Emily asked after her first sip of coffee. Elena took a moment to answer. "I'm scared." But yes. For the first time, yes. Emily nodded, looking out the window. "I never said sorry. Not really. And I never asked you to." They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then Emily let out a soft laugh. "You know he's going to suffer, right?" Elena smiled, half sad. "He already is. But this time, he wants to go through it with me." The following week, Elena and Noah traveled to Boston. She had a business event. He had meetings with potential clients. They shared a small, modest room, far from luxury. It was as if, in that smaller space, they could rediscover each other without the weight of the past. They talked about everything. High school, the first time Liam felt something for Noah, the moment Elena decided to return. There were no more secrets, just open wounds. Some healed, some still in progress. One night, while walking along the Charles River, Noah stopped and took her hand. "Did you know I was going to say yes at the altar?" Elena thought for a moment. "No, but I hoped. I'm an idiot. You know that, right?" "No. You're a man who grew, who was scared, who hurt. But who's here now? That's more than most would do." He kissed her right there, slowly, gently, like someone who finally understood everything that gesture meant. Time passed. Months later, Elena returned to Charleston, no longer as the mysterious businesswoman or the ghost of someone forgotten, but as someone who had built her story with courage. Noah opened a small, independent architecture office. Emily returned to teaching and launched a school project focused on listening to LGBTQIA+ youth. The three of them moved forward on different paths, but connected by something larger than all of it: the ability to recognize mistakes, to reinvent themselves, and to allow love, the real kind, to have new chances to exist. And on an autumn morning, no ceremony, no guests, no veils or eternal promises, Elena and Noah were married at the local courthouse. They wore simple clothes, they smiled the whole time, and at the end, instead of posed kisses or planned photos, they shared a look that said everything. It wasn't a restart, it was, finally, the right beginning. Everything. Left unsaid. Night fell over Charleston with a breeze colder than usual. The warm yellow glow of old street lamps reflected off the rain-slicked streets, remnants of a light drizzle earlier that evening. Noah parked his car 2 blocks, away from the address Elena had sent him. He didn't want to risk being seen. He wasn't exactly sure why. Maybe because, deep down, he already knew this visit had crossed the line of casual. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, his thoughts pounding in rhythm with his steps. The lie he told Emily had been simple: "I need to deal with a client issue." But inside him, the truth screamed louder with every step. Elena opened the loft door before he even knocked, as if she had known the exact moment he'd arrive. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized white shirt that looked like a dress. Her hair was down, loose and natural. There was nothing in her appearance that resembled the powerful businesswoman from the gala. At that moment, she was just Elena. No posing, no armor. Noah paused, staring at her like he wanted to lock that image in some private corner of his memory. Without saying a word, she stepped aside to let him in. The silence between them was full of meaning. The living room was lit only by soft lamps and a few candles. Smooth jazz played in the background, but it was their breathing that set the rhythm of the moment. Elena guided him to the open kitchen, where 2 glasses of wine were already poured. He picked one up silently. So did she. They toasted without words, their eyes fixed on one another. It was Noah who broke the silence, his voice low and uncertain. "Do you always do this? Leave me unsure of what I'm feeling." Elena smiled, but there was sadness behind her eyes. "Do you always ignore how you feel? Or just when you're near me?" He didn't answer, just took a sip and looked away. He felt vulnerable, confused, exposed, but there was also a growing desire pulling him toward her like a magnet, the kind of attraction that can't be explained, that doesn't care about the past or logic. They sat on the couch and the conversation slipped into deeper waters. Noah talked about his childhood, about always feeling like he didn't quite know who he was. Elena listened, never interrupting. Then it was her turn. She spoke about her transition, the physical pain, the rejections, the loneliness. But she didn't name names. She didn't say that he had been one of the people who hurt her. "There was someone really important to me," she said, staring into her glass. "Someone who saw me, before I even knew who I was. And still, they turned their back." Noah swallowed hard. The words hit him with force. He wanted to ask more, but didn't have the courage. Everything inside him seemed to recognize those words as if they were his, too. Then, slowly and silently, he leaned in, touched her hand, then her face. Elena didn't move away. They stayed like that, looking into each other's eyes, and then they kissed. A kiss filled with everything left unsaid, with everything that had gotten stuck in time. A kiss that blurred past and present, love and guilt, desire and confession. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone at home, her eyes wet as she stared at her laptop screen. She had found an old interview with Elena, and at minute 12:37 she saw something she could no longer deny. A childhood photo, briefly projected in the background. It was Liam, the same smile, the same eyes, the same look he gave her when he said, "I loved you, but now I have to disappear." Emily collapsed onto the couch, stunned. The truth she had only suspected was now in front of her, undeniable and brutal. Elena was Liam, and Noah was falling in love with her all over again. Without realizing she was the same person he once rejected. Emily felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just about desire. It was about history, about everything she had tried to erase, rebuild, now returning like a ghost with a new name and a new body. With trembling hands, she grabbed her car keys. She had to see them. She had to understand. She had to stop this lie from exploding at the altar. Or maybe let it explode now and finally set them all free. Back at the loft, Noah and Elena were now lying on the couch, silent, bodies folded into each other. Elena stared at the ceiling, feeling tears she didn't want to let fall. Noah, still confused, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. And soon, it would all turn into chaos. Everything left. Unsaid night was falling over Charleston, and a colder breeze than usual drifted through the streets. The yellow glow of the old streetlights reflected off rain-slick cobblestones, remnants of an earlier drizzle. Noah parked his car 2 blocks away from the address Elena had sent. He didn't want to risk being seen. He wasn't even sure why. Maybe because, deep down, he already knew this visit had crossed the line of casual. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, thoughts pounding like drums in his chest. The lie to Emily had been simple. I need to deal with a client issue. But inside, the truth was screaming louder with every step. Elena opened the door to her loft before he even knocked, as if she had known the exact moment he'd arrive. She was barefoot, wearing an oversized white shirt that looked like a dress. Her hair was down, natural. Nothing about her appearance resembled the powerful businesswoman from the gala. In that moment, she was just Elena. No poses, no armor. Noah stood still for a moment, just looking at her, like he wanted to memorize the image and lock it away somewhere private. Without a word, she stepped aside to let him in. The silence between them was thick with meaning. The loft was lit only by soft lamps and a few candles. Smooth jazz filled the space, but it was their breathing that truly set the rhythm. Elena led him to the open kitchen, where 2 glasses of wine were already poured. He picked one up without speaking. So did she. They clinked glasses in silence, eyes locked. Noah was the first to speak, his voice low. "Do you always do this? Leave me not knowing what I'm feeling?" Elena smiled, but her eyes held a sadness. "Do you always ignore what you feel, or just when you're around me?" He didn't answer. He just took a sip, looking away. He felt vulnerable, confused, exposed. But there was also something undeniable pulling him toward her. That kind of attraction that doesn't care about logic or history. The kind you feel, even when you don't understand. They moved to the couch. The conversation slid gently into deeper waters. Noah spoke about his childhood, about always feeling like he didn't quite know who he was. Elena listened without interruption. Then it was her turn. She spoke of her transition, the physical pain, the rejection, the abandonment. But she never mentioned names. She didn't say he was one of the ones who had hurt her. "There was someone really important to me," she said, staring into her glass. "Someone who saw me before I even knew who I was, and still turned away." Noah swallowed hard. The words hit him deep. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't have the courage. Some part of him already knew, as if those words belonged to him too. Then, slowly, silently, he leaned in, touched her hand, then her face. Elena didn't pull away. They stayed like that, eyes locked for long seconds. And then they kissed. A kiss full of everything that had never been said, of everything that had been stuck in time. A kiss that blurred the line between past and present, between love and guilt, desire and confession. Meanwhile, Emily sat alone at home, staring at her laptop through tear-filled eyes. She had found an old interview with Elena, and at minute 12:37, she saw something undeniable. A childhood photo flashed briefly in the background. It was Liam. That same smile, those same eyes, the same look he had when he said, "I loved you, but now I have to disappear." Emily collapsed onto the couch in shock. The truth she had suspected was now right in front of her, painful and final. Elena was Liam, and Noah. He was falling in love with her all over again. Without knowing, it was the same person he had once rejected. Emily felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just betrayal about desire. It was about history, about everything she had tried to erase, rebuild. And now it was coming back like a ghost, with a new name and a new body. With trembling hands, she grabbed her car keys. She had to see them. She had to understand. She had to stop this lie from exploding at the altar. Or maybe let it explode now. And finally, set them all free. Back at the loft, Noah and Elena now lay on the couch in silence, bodies folded into each other. Elena stared at the ceiling, blinking away tears she didn't want to let fall. Noah was still confused, but for the first time in a long while, he felt peace, and soon it would all turn into chaos. What's left after morning arrived with a deceiving calm, as if the world hadn't realized what was about to happen. The city moved at its usual pace, cars filled the streets, cafes served rushed customers, and no one knew that, inside a quiet loft, two people had lived through a night that changed everything. Elena woke before Noah. She watched him sleep for a few minutes, his face calm, almost childlike, and she wondered, was this the last peaceful moment before everything fell apart? She got up quietly, walked to the kitchen, and began making coffee. Her movements were automatic, almost numb. Her mind spun in circles. Should I tell him now? Wait a little longer. Let him find out on his own. Every part of her body told her. Time was running out. The truth was there, throbbing, ready to burst through. And deep down, she knew. Real love doesn't survive a lie, unless it's strong enough to go through it all. Noah appeared minutes later, wearing only the shirt from the night before. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her. She closed her eyes. "You're different from anyone I've ever known," he whispered. She smiled, painfully. She knew what he didn't, and she knew that sooner or later, it would change the sound of his voice, the warmth of his touch. As they sipped coffee in silence, Noah's phone buzzed on the counter. 3 messages from Emily. He didn't answer. He didn't want to stain that moment with guilt, even though it had already begun to creep in. But across town, Emily wasn't just waiting. She was already on her way. She drove without music, without rehearsing what she would say. She only knew one thing. She needed to look them in the eye. She needed to hear the truth from Elena's lips, even though, by now, it was already certain. She parked in front of the sleek building and took a deep breath, then sent a single message to Noah. "Come down, we need to talk." Upstairs, Noah saw the message and froze. Elena noticed instantly. Their eyes met, and she understood everything before he said a word. Emily was there. The past had come knocking, literally. Noah hesitated for a moment, then made his choice. He got dressed quickly, said only, "Wait for me," and left. Emily stood by the car, worn down but steady. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. She just looked at him, like someone carrying the weight of years of silence. "Where did you spend the night?" she asked, looking straight into his eyes. Noah took a deep breath. There were so many lies on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't say a single one. With her. Emily nodded. She didn't look surprised. The silence that followed was long enough to hurt. "Do you know who she is?" I don't understand. What are you saying?" "Elena is Liam." The name hit Noah like an explosion in the chest. Time stopped. Memories crashed into him like waves. The friend, the hug at the school gate, the night of the confession, the distance, the shame, the name written in the letter. Liam, the boy who disappeared. Now, the woman he loved. That can't be true," he whispered. "I saw it, Noah. It's all there. Photos, articles, her story. And I helped push him away. So did you. But she came back. And you fell for her all over again, without even realizing she was the same person." Noah's body weakened. He wanted to deny it, to scream, to run, but something inside him knew. It wasn't impossible. It made sense. It was real. It was cruel. And it was beautiful too, because the feeling was there. The same feeling that once scared him so deeply. Now, it flooded his chest. But now, he knew, and knowing changes everything. From the window above, Elena watched them. She saw Noah's body collapse under the weight of truth. She saw Emily standing firm, stronger than ever, and she knew it was time. She grabbed her bag, tied up her hair, took a deep breath, and stepped out. There was no turning back. The truth at the altar. The sky was clear, the sun shining mercilessly, and the countryside venue in South Carolina was delicately decorated. White flowers draped from wooden arches, polished wooden chairs lined up in perfect rows, and a small, light wood stage had been built just for this moment. Emily and Noah's wedding was meant to be intimate, beautiful, and until a few days ago, it had felt certain. But now, everything stood on silence and appearances. Guests smiled, took photos, laughed softly, and only the three of them knew that this morning carried more than vows. It carried years of lies, open wounds, and choices on the verge of collapse. Emily was in the bride's room, staring at the mirror with a hollow in her chest that not even the carefully chosen lace dress could fill. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She was calm, like someone standing at the edge of a storm, already accepting what's to come. She knew Noah would show up. He was too good to run, but too unsure to stay without hesitation. And she knew Elena would be there too. She could feel it. She had no idea what would happen, but of one thing she was certain. She wouldn't leave that ceremony without exposing everything, like a wound held to the light. On the other side of the property, Noah was getting dressed with the help of his brother. The suit jacket felt tighter, the tie more suffocating. Everything about this ritual felt wrong. Elena hadn't answered a single message since his conversation with Emily. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. He'd spent those nights replaying the timeline of his own story, trying to figure out when Liam faded, when Elena emerged, and why his heart had never stopped recognizing that same essence. The night before, he'd seriously considered running, but in the end, he came. Out of respect for everything he'd built, and out of courage, he knew something needed to be said. He couldn't keep living in the middle of the road. The guests began to take their seats. The officiant organized the ceremony notes. Soft music drifted through the air as Noah took his place at the altar, his face serious, his eyes scanning the crowd. And then, he saw her. Elena, in a red dress, standing tall, walking slowly between the rows of guests, looking at him with the calm of someone who was no longer afraid of being seen. Emily saw her too. Their eyes met the exact moment Elena sat in the second to last row. The air froze, just for a second. Then everything went on, as if no one knew what was about to happen. Emily appeared at the head of the aisle, her father at her side. She walked, slowly, her face calm, but her eyes heavy. When she reached the altar, she took Noah's hand and smiled. He tried to smile back, but failed. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking of love, choices, and courage, words that, within this context, hurt. Then came the vows. Emily looked at Noah, took a deep breath, and began. When I met you, I didn't know what love was. I learned with you how to build, how to care, how to endure. Even through pain, you were my anchor. But love isn't just comfort. It's truth, it's wholeness. And because of that, today, in front of everyone, I say I'm ready to hear any truth, even if it destroys me, because I'd rather feel the pain of reality than the comfort of a lie. Silence fell. Noah held the paper with his vows, but didn't read it. He slowly folded it. He looked at Emily, then at Elena. His hands trembled. His heart pounded in his throat. I can't. A murmur ran through the crowd. Emily didn't flinch. She just nodded, as if she already knew. Noah turned, locked eyes, with Elena, and walked toward her. He extended his hand. I can't keep pretending. Not after all this. Not after finding you again. Even without knowing it was you. Elena stood, her eyes brimming with tears. She took his hand, but before taking a step, she walked toward the altar. She cleared her throat, faced the crowd. My Name is Elena Morgan, but many of you once knew me as Liam Carter. I left this town at 17, after being outed, humiliated, and left completely alone. It took me years to understand who I was, to have the courage to be who I am. And now, I'm here, not for revenge, but to say this: yes, people change. And real love can survive time, lies, and even versions of ourselves. A heavy silence swept across the space. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared at Elena, stunned. Emily stood still, watching it all, her eyes full. Elena turned to Noah. "Now you know who I am, truly. Do you still want this?" Noah didn't answer right away. He looked around, took a deep breath, then, his voice shaking, "Yes." The answer was simple, but it carried an entire lifetime. Emily stepped away from the altar slowly. No drama. She walked down the aisle, paused at the end, turned to them both and said, loud enough for all to hear, "Let it be real this time." And then she left.